All right. Good evening, everyone. Our next panel concerns building America's future, the U.S. in the world of AI. My name is Elijah Lutweiler, a staff writer for the Chicago Thinker and a graduate student in the Divinity School. I'll begin by introducing the distinguished speakers joining us tonight. We have Donald R. Wilson, who founded DRW in 1992 and has grown it into a global trading and investment firm spanning financial markets, venture capital, real estate, and crypto assets. In addition to his leadership in finance and market innovation, he is deeply involved in philanthropy and education, including serving as a trustee of the University of Chicago, where he is an alumni. Jordan Blashek is the co-founder and managing partner of America's Frontier Fund, where he works at the intersection of technology, national security, and American industrial strategy. A U.S. Marine Corps veteran who served in Afghanistan, he holds a JD from Yale Law School, an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business, and a BA from Princeton University. He is also co-author of the book Union, a Democrat, a Republican, and a Search for Common Ground. Alec Litowitz is the founder and former CEO of Magnetar Capital and now leads Reimagined Ventures, an office investing across venture capital, real estate, hospitality, and more. He is a founding partner of Citadel and also the Center for Enlightened Disagreement at Northwestern. He's also been active in financial education, expanding access to financial literacy for students. Speaking of, Alec's new book, The Adaptability Quotient, A Practical Guide to Navigating an Uncertain Era, launches in September, and we are excited to share that 300 of our attendees can pre-order the book for free. Moderating this panel tonight, we have Shubhankar Gupta. Shub is a third-year Odyssey Scholar in the college, majoring in statistics, and serves as the Director of Development at the Chicago Thinker. He's also a RISE Fellow, announced by Schmidt Futures and the Rhodes Trust. Join me in welcoming our speakers.
We have a very distinguished panel here, and we're going to talk about a topic that is greatly contended today, artificial intelligence. Now, as we speak, currently, President Trump is flying back with a delegation that he led to China with top American leaders in AI. There's a lot of debate around whether we should let the free markets outcompete China, whether or not we should even try to outcompete China, or whether the government should intervene in order to have, in order to facilitate AI development. Now, my first question is for Jordan. As someone who's served in Afghanistan as a veteran and now invests in AI firms, how do you think, to what extent do you feel the government should intervene in order to accelerate AI development, if at all?
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. Thank you to everyone in the audience for being here on a Friday night. And it's an honor to sit next to two titans of the financial world. I don't really know why you invited me here. I think the key question is not should the government intervene, it's what should the government be doing. The AI race is a civilizational competition. If we win this race, the next 100 years are built on American values, values of liberal democracy, human rights, individual autonomy. And if we lose this race, we will cede the future to an authoritarian power like China. And the question is, what does it take to win this race? This race is not just about AI. It's about how intelligence gets filtered across all of society. And it takes building across energy, manufacturing, compute, and talent and workforce to all align in order to win. And there are some things that we need the government to step in and do, or we need them to step away and let the free market do. And the key point I would make is that the pace of artificial intelligence is so high there's no chance the government can keep up and make the right choices for how to intervene and how to build the economy. The only organizational unit that can move fast enough to keep up with this race and to make sure we lead it is entrepreneurs, it's founders, it's people who can move and ideate and test and iterate in the market. And we need the government to be supportive of that. Sometimes that means putting in place the right incentive structures through taxes. Sometimes it means subsidizing or purchasing things that we need to get out there right now. But a lot of it is just getting out of the way and letting our entrepreneurs do what they do best.
I see. So you do believe in that I would classify as a fairly free market solution to the problem that you stated. Now, Don and then Alec, to what extent do you see China as a threat? And to what extent should the United States, in order to protect its interests, pursue AI development to outcompete China?
Yeah, so I think I'm in the same place as Jordan, that there's no way that the government can solve these problems. But the government can slow them down. They can mess it up, or they can do things to help progress at a faster pace. So what are some examples? Europe, I think, really wants to regulate AI models. Mm-hmm. That's a disaster. That's how you slow everything down. And right now, there's a little bit of a tinge of that with, you've probably all heard about Mythos, the latest Anthropic model. Incredibly powerful. A lot of concern about the ability to hack things using Mythos. And the Anthropic team has kind of been tapped on the shoulder and told to slow it down. And I don't know. I mean, I get it, but I think slowing this stuff down is a bad idea. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, all of this requires massive amounts of power, and so and we have a pretty broken grid. So doing things to improve the grid, to make it easier to deploy new power plants, nuclear power plants, et cetera, in order to facilitate more data center construction. That's a super constructive thing to do. The other thing to think about is what should our policy be as far as chip exports? Mm-hmm. And I think that the word was that maybe there will be a deal to export H-100s to China. And I think you can have a real debate about whether H-100s are kind of old enough, like second or third generation enough, so that doesn't do too much harm. The argument to do it is, well, if we don't do it, then they're forced to kind of go and build their own stuff, and maybe that's gonna cause them to catch up. So maybe we're better off giving them kind of the slightly older stuff. But it's not an easy answer.
I see. So you reflected some agreement with Jordan on that. I see. And now, Alec, building off of what you just said, Don, the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, after Trump's trip, expressed the need for both China and the U.S. government to collaborate in order to regulate AI models and large language models. Is that something that you personally support? And how, you specialize in identifying trends in industrial growth. And is that something that you would support? And how do you see the government best supporting growth in artificial intelligence?
I probably would agree with what these gentlemen said, but maybe I'll zoom out and abstract a little bit. And just, at first principles, I think that nations compete on the adaptive capacity of both their people and institutions. And so at the end of the day, U.S. exceptionalism has been a balance, if you will, of incredible power of ingenuity, of what we have in the United States sometimes is less coordination at the top, but an incredibly powerful edge experimentation. We have incredible capital markets. We can accelerate faster probably than China. China has extreme coordination de facto. but doesn't have the same edge experimentation, right? And so, when you think about who wins what? From a technology perspective, I would think that those two types of, platforms, if you will, or structures would favor the U.S. over China from a technological development. But I agree that the question then becomes, is that sufficient? I mean, the U.S. hasn't become what it is because it's just free-run capitalism. Effectively, institutions at the national level serve as a vessel for coordination, right? So I think Jordan or Don both talked about, right now, we do a lot in energy, Magnetar and some of the spin-offs that I'm involved in of Magnetar, and then we do a lot with data centers, CoreWeave and otherwise. And one of the big impediments, it's land shell power, but to build land shell power, it's plumbers, it's electricians. So we could create a incredible employment workforce solution that would be at the bottom level, enable us to compete. Those are orchestration type effects that you expect, and those are the things that a government can do as opposed to individual, organizations. So I would sit and say simply, if I zoom out, that it requires both this entrepreneurial spirit combined with this structural aspect to it that is brought by governments. There is a human element to this writ large across us as a species. That should involve some level of coordination with China. You might sit and go, well, how is that possible? But let's just look. Nuclear weapons have been around for 80 years. Has anybody seen one used in the last 80 years? There is a concept at some point around what I'll call, adaptive coordination, right? If we know something's horrible, then we might not both do it. It's a game theory, but AI is a bit uncertain. It makes game theory more complex. So I believe that there is some orchestration at the government level. It gets a little complex beyond that. I'll stop there because I've used up a lot of time.
No, okay, that's very interesting. Now, moving back to resources, and both Don and Alec spoke about resources a bit. You, Don, have been working on making compute a commodity over the last few years. Can you describe what that looks like and where you see the future of that very niche technology headed?
Yeah, so I spent a decent amount of time in Silicon Valley, and so it was pretty clear that that compute was becoming a scarce resource a few years ago, and I formed this thesis that compute would become a commodity, and not only that within the next 10 years, the world will spend more money per year on compute than on crude oil. Mm-hmm. But what you see, especially with the neoclouds, these independent companies as opposed to the hyperscalers that are just buying GPUs and renting them out, in many cases, their cost of capital is quite high. CoreWeave did a good job because they entered into some long-term contract with some credit-worthy companies, but some of the other ones, pay through the nose for capital. And the reason for that is that there's no predictability about the future price of compute. And people have these arguments of, what's the useful life of the latest NVIDIA chip? Is it 3 years, or is it 10 years, or is it somewhere in between? And what will the trajectory of the price of that NVIDIA chip be? Now, imagine if there were futures contracts that traded kind of like electricity contracts, where there's one for each month, and it reflects the average hourly price of a specific chip. If that existed, then a neocloud could, let's say, buy the GPUs and then maybe hedge out the first 4 or 5 years of compute, and then rent them out on a short-term basis to even startups that don't have credit. They would de-risk that forward price, and they would be able to fund at a much cheaper rate. And then on the flip side, obviously AI companies that kind of know that they're going to need compute in the future could buy a strip of futures, and then as they get closer to their training run or their inference demands start to grow, then they can go and buy the exact cluster that they need, unwind the futures contract, and but they've kind of locked in something close to the pricing that they're going to incur. So we started two companies. One is called Silicon Data. The other is called Compute Exchange. Compute Exchange is a spot market for compute where you can go on the website and send out an RFQ, and a bunch of neoclouds respond to the RFQ. And Silicon Data has, collects any and all data about the space, and they've built these very effective indices for each GPU. So, when there's a article in the Wall Street Journal about, is this a bubble or not, they generally quote, show a picture of the Silicon Data Index. And actually recently, we saw this really interesting phenomenon. Going into December, the price of an H100 just kept on going down, down, down. And then December 15th, it turned around, and since then it's gone up and to the right. It's making new highs. And why? What happened mid-December? Claude 4.5 came out. It's just amazing. So this week on Tuesday, we announced that Silicon Data licensed its indices to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the largest exchange in the world, to launch GPU futures, which will be listed later this year. So
that is very interesting, and especially the part about Claude 4.5 facilitating that shift in GPU prices. Now, you worked as a trader all of your life, and that probably guides why you've been so successful in doing this. Jordan, you were a veteran who served in Afghanistan on the field. What are some experiences on the field that that guide how you invest in defense companies and AI companies and people working in that area today?
It's a good question. So I served in the Marine Corps. For those who don't know, the Marines are a rapid response force in a sense. We historically have been based on Navy ships. We do ship-to-shore type missions, and one of our missions when we were commissioned under the National Security Act in 1947 is to serve at the pleasure of the president, meaning if the president needs something, we do it. That's why there's always the saying, send in the Marines. And so we've been highly adaptive over the years, and whether it's in Afghanistan where I served and we had to figure out how to train the Afghan army for combat operations, or we're doing things like patrolling the Persian Gulf today to try to keep it open through the Straits of Hormuz. The Marines have historically just been taught to always be flexible, be super frugal, adapt, and then ultimately overcome whatever it is we're told to do. And I think that that at like the most generic level, when I invest in a company, I'm looking for founders who embody a lot of those principles. We want to see individuals who, no matter what's thrown at them, they're going to be able to figure it out. They'll run through walls to do it. And they have an incredible grit, a sense of frugality. They try to make their resources go as far as possible. And they look for these like key either centers of gravity or critical vulnerabilities that allow them to do something important. And if I take that and apply it into investment in AI, again, these are sort of generic principles about what you look for in a great founder. In AI, I think the important thing that we've started using as a framework is AI is making a lot of things abundant. It's making intelligence abundant. It's making the ability to do service work very abundant. And so the question in that is, now what becomes the scarce resource? You always have to find the scarce resource to understand where value is going to accrue. And that might be talent. It could be that there's a very small number of AI researchers that are the best in the world at a certain kind of thing. And if this company has that scarce resource, that is interesting to invest in. It could be on the energy or compute front. And if there's access to a scarce resource, whether that's turbines or a certain piece of land that has the right permitting, those all become very interesting. And so I think a key principle for us as we look to invest in this new AI era is both the people behind it, what are the qualities that make them just incredible entrepreneurs, make them able to lead great teams and marshal them towards a certain mission, And then the next is we look for that scarce resource. What is it that's going to accrue value in an era where many things are becoming very abundant?
I see. And I guess a follow-up to that is, how do you see the future of warfare changing, and how do you think it is changing now?
We're in this interesting transition moment. Historically, technology has had this important effect on warfare. Changes in technology change the nature of war, and changes in the nature of war can really affect the global order. I think that's sort of a very simple proposition. And AI is one of the biggest technological revolutions we've had in a very long time. And so inevitably, it's going to change war. I think the very simple framework is it's going to make small, attritable, swarm-type systems very common on the battlefield. So if you look at Ukraine, the use of drones has become ubiquitous. The Ukrainians are using 20,000 drones per month. And the whole battlefield is now just one big sort of hellscape of drones flying and soldiers sitting in bunkers. So you can begin to see what that looks like. We're at the very early innings of this. One of the kind of interesting anecdotes about the operations in Iran is that not a single one of these new defense tech companies that we've all been investing in over the last 7 years has been on the battlefield. They're just not there. And it means that we've had a sea change in how the Defense Department buys technology from the private sector. We've seen a huge influx, mostly due to Anduril, of companies and founders that want to build for defense, but it's still super early. And the reason is, the military is not going to send into theaters of combat technologies that are not proven. And we just haven't had a chance to really prove these technologies over and over again. So while this transition to small autonomous swarm attritable technologies is going to happen, and it's going to proliferate across all domains of warfare, it's still in the very, very early innings. It means for students, there's a lot of opportunity to go build there. And it means for anyone thinking geostrategically, you have to factor in that we see this wave coming, warfare is changing, and yet we're still caught between kind of the old and the new in the way we fight on the battlefield.
Okay, that is okay. And it is very interesting to see how, especially in Ukraine today, you don't have a lot of even in-person combat. But my next question actually is for Alec. Over the next decade, how do you see the life of the average American change as a result of AI? And what are some technologies today that you think have a lot of promise going forward? Of course, AI is a very all-encapsulating word, but if there's something specific that you are looking into.
Well, maybe I'll zoom out for a second again, because we have to get to that point. So my biggest concern, and there's lots of opportunities on the right side, and we could talk about what technologies I think are, but I do think that to get to the promise of the benefit of sort of the right tail of things, and we're already getting some, where we'll get breakthroughs in healthcare, we'll get abundance, in certain things that were scarce, certainly if you want to call it at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Cheaper intelligence will be free, production of certain items that were scarce will be free. But I think that one of the challenges that we're going to face is that when intelligence becomes commoditized and free, the scarce resource becomes agency. I think that becomes the most important. And the only way to recover agency is through that adaptation. So I think that what needs to happen first is that both at the individual level, there has to be so one of the things that has to change is potentially education and the way we train people to become adaptive. What worked in a prior regime, what worked in prior history, this is a very different moment, and it'll get a little to where I'll go in your answer direct to your question. But if you go look at the first industrial revolution and the second industrial revolution, we effectively transformed atoms. It was physical. We offloaded physical labor. We had a algorithm. It made a machine out of our instructions, and it came back, and a hammer's a hammer, and a machine's a machine. In the third industrial revolution, we took bits, and we manipulated bits, and we offloaded storage, retrieval, computation. But again, the bits came back, a calculation, the way it was formulated. This is a different revolution. In my opinion, this is not the fourth industrial revolution. This is the second cognitive revolution. After when we had language in humans. because here tokens, while they're technically bits, they're meaning making. When you go ask a question to an LLM and what comes back is a compression. That compression is normally what we do. It gives you an answer. It doesn't give you 1 million pages of Google where you have to go synthesize and compress. It gives you something to compress. So the fear is that while it's incredibly good at things like coding, things like math, because it can digitally verify it, when it requires embodied verification, it's not that good. But it's so fluent that you as a human sit and go, it's really easy to take that answer. I'll just go apply it in my life. So the fear is that we'll live in this world of complacency and that will effectively let our cognition atrophy. I'm worried about that and how we create technologies and both at the institutional level and others that repair that or stave off that cognitive atrophy. The reality is, though, that an answer direct to your question on what does that mean for the positive right side, what tools and I think both of the other gentlemen on the stage are talking and have talked about part of the reason I even stepped away from running Magnetar was the combination of data, compute, and material science is causing a punctuated equilibrium. It's causing a step function change in energy and transition, synthetic biology, the new financial rail system, for lack of a better word, frontier sciences, AI, quantum, fusion, space, defense, robotics. The things that we're going to see are things that one even can't imagine. If you can get to the point, I'm not saying we're there, it's always 20 years off, but if you can get to fusion, think about the cost not only of intelligence goes to zero, if the cost of energy, which is pretty much the largest input in everything, goes to zero, right? Why do we not have desalination plants all over the place? Cost of energy. If the cost of energy goes to zero, it's so transformative, right? It's just massively. So like if we're at the cutting edge or getting closer to fusion, what does that bring about? And imagining what that could be. Same thing on, where we, fuse over AI and robotics. Can we get to a point where AI and LLMs are not just taking in language, they can listen and other things, but they're not embodied, right? And so we're going to see an incredible number of changes on the positive side, but society has to be able to metabolize that change, both at the individual and the institutional level. And my question is, those are great things and we could talk about what's coming, but we better prepare ourselves as a society and as people for that change because it doesn't look like anything we've experienced before. This is a cognitive revolution. It's not atoms and bits.
I see. Now that is very interesting. And could you please be a little more specific on what exactly the second cognitive revolution looks like? And in your previous answer, you briefly referenced education and how educational institutions have to change to facilitate this or facilitate around it. Could you be more specific how?
So the second cognitive revolution, the argument basically is that if you go to what I said about atoms and bits, the first, second, and third revolutions, they were about how we work. This is about how we think. We've never had a participant in our thinking. We've never offloaded judgment. What comes back in that compression is a recommendation. It's a judgment. It's generative AI. It is very different than what we've had before. So I think to think that it's not being used or is going to be used or is already being used, I'm leaving aside agents that are doing subroutines. And even though you have to prompt it, it is making judgmental decisions by itself, right? So yes, with a reward function, but it is still doing it. So at the end of the day, we are now in a not post-human world, of course. We're in a post-human only narrative world. That's gone. Forever, we've been the only narrators. Everything you got on Google was a human output. It's not true anymore. So that's just a different, it's got incredible capability. It could be wonderful in many ways. But to not think about the repercussions of it is to, I like to say AI is a tool at the interface. It is a regime shift at the system level. It is not like other tools. It's different. And then on education, I would say, well, if the defining characteristic of what you need is to become adaptive, what is school? Mostly, sorry, maybe not USC. I'm a graduate of grad school here. But the reality is that a lot of school is convergent. It's teaching you to come up with one answer. But I'm sure if you ask these gentlemen, whether it's in military, whether it's in business or otherwise, most of what we deal with every day is divergent problems that there is no right answer. You're just you're going through. I reduce things down first principles. I come up with theory, a hypothesis. I figure out how to test it. I test it. I want the fastest feedback loops possible. I turn around and I revise my theory. That's what AI can't do. That humans can do it. We can go and be in the muck, in the mud, experiencing. So how do we create an education system that allows people more freedom, right? I like to say sometimes, no wonder, no wonder. People, everybody here probably who's an undergrad can feel it. The old deal, the old causal deal where I do well, I get a job, that relationship, that old form of agency is over. So what it requires is some changes as trusted institutions that they can adapt as well, and that they could be places where people can learn to adapt, to take this moment when you have very little to lose as a young person, and go explore across differences. I mean, someone mentioned at the beginning, we created the Litowitz Center for Enlightened Disagreement at Northwestern because part of what you're supposed to do in school is talk across in a constructive way. How are we different? How are we the same? If we can't have a dialogue at the university level and between people, how are we going to create society level stabilizers? How are we going to create rules and vessels for that entrepreneurship if we don't even have a shared language? So I think that we need a shared language for how people can go forward in this world, given and contingent on the fact that it looks very different than it did in the past.
I see. My next question is for Dawn, and it pertains to cryptocurrencies. Where do you see the future of cryptocurrencies going, and to what extent do you think the government should be involved in them?
So, we've been involved in the crypto space for a very long time. In 2014, we set up Cumberland, which is one of the largest B2B liquidity providers in the space. But I thought at the time that there was some small chance that the world would view Bitcoin as digital gold. I don't know, maybe we're kind of getting closer to a bigger percentage of the world believing that. That's fine. I think that the more interesting thing is actually one of the things that blockchain enables is the ability to transfer value without an intermediary immediately 24/7. And that capability is something that has the potential to dramatically improve traditional financial markets, to make them more resilient, to make them more efficient. And of course, there is now this push to make traditional financial markets 24/7. Equity markets are kind of moving towards 24/5, and really they're already in some sense 24/7 because hyperliquid is trading through weekends, and when the Iran war started, everybody was looking at the price of oil on hyperliquid. That's of course causing the incumbent exchanges to wake up and go like, oh, okay, I guess we need to do this sooner than we kind of thought. But as soon as you do that, you need to move cash on weekends. You need to move it at night. You need to be able to move treasuries as collateral. And so that's, I think, the big unlock that's happening. We've been working for a very long time on a chain called the Canton Network, which is a public blockchain, but with privacy that most of the major financial institutions are now connecting to, and most importantly, the DTCC, which is the place that clears all U.S. equities, all corporate bonds, U.S. corporate bonds, municipal bonds, and a lot of U.S. treasuries, is starting this summer going to give asset owners the option of moving their assets onto the Canton blockchain. Once you do that, now you can move your treasury or your stock 24/7. You can use it as collateral in new ways that you couldn't use it before. You can, on a Saturday morning, you can take a United States Treasury that you fully paid for and transform that into tokenized cash. We've been doing that. There have been, 5 or 6 kind of practice trades, but real trades where we took We took a treasury, we asked the DTCC, hey, please put it on Canton Network, and then we repoed it out on a Saturday morning, got USDC back, and then unwound it a little bit later. So this is all happening, and it's going to have profound benefits for asset owners. Yeah. I mean, one of the other things I'll say is, right now, if there's a stock that is hard to borrow, there are a bunch of hedge funds that want to short it. If you're long the stock, you probably get little or no benefit from the fact that everybody wants to be short that stock. There are a bunch of Wall Street banks that kind of split up that benefit. And maybe if you have a lot of assets, you can negotiate that some portion of it gets passed on to you. Once this stuff is on chain, you can control your own stock loan. You can lend it out yourself and collect 100% of that hard to borrow characteristic. So there's a huge benefit to asset owners.
That sounds very exciting. And speaking of,
see, he's increasing agency for everybody. That's what
that is definitely increasing agency. Yes.
Yeah. My next question is about another very exciting space. Now, both Jordan and Alec invest in space tech companies. Where do you see the future of space going, and how realistic is it for humans to have a colony sometime in the next half century?
On Mars?
You can,
or on the moon.
That's something you can. Look, I think this is right around the corner. We are big investors in a company called Icon. Icon started as a 3D printing construction company looking to solve the housing crisis. How do you dramatically drop the cost of building new homes? They recently won a contract from NASA to build the moon base. And so Artemis, the new NASA program that is looking to bring us back to the moon, has basically said we want a moon base in the next 5 years. And so this company is working right now with NASA scientists to figure out how you do that. And it's an incredibly hard problem. If you think about the moon, it is a harsh environment. You have micro asteroids or micrometeors that are constantly bombarding the surface of the moon. These are tiny little rocks that are flying 30,000 miles per hour. You have to figure out how to prevent those from destroying all your equipment. You don't want to have to take huge amounts of concrete up there. So what do? You have to take the moon dust and figure out how to turn that into something that could be used to build. But these are solvable problems. And when you give innovators, scientists, American entrepreneurs the task of go figure out how to do this, we're actually incredibly good at that. And so I think the likelihood that we will have a moon base in the next 10 years, I put at close to 100%.
I would also, so I've been invested in SpaceX since 2018, and I think there was two reasons why I did it, and I think, I agree with everything Jordan just said, but I would add two things that I think are often overlooked. So one is that a lot of the technology that is developed for the purpose of, moon, Artemis or Apollo trickles down and becomes very impactful back on Earth. Right? So along the way to solving those problems, you solve lots of other terrestrial problems. The second is that it provides hope and meaning, which is in short supply right now. What are we doing? What do these things mean? What does this change mean? Like, there's lack of a narrative. I think that, if you go back to this Artemis mission that just occurred, like when, the furthest humans ever, I mean, people who had no interest typically in other things were all glued to what was going on. Why? Why is that? And I think it's partly because people are searching for meaning, that this is humans, we're exploring. I mean, right now, I mean, maybe everybody here knows or not, the universe is what we think is 92, 93 billion light years across. Voyager, which is the furthest any human object has ever gone, is 1 light day, and humans have gone 1 light second. I mean, just like, we've gone nowhere. I mean, we accomplished a lot. But I think that's part of the sort of like, hope is an incredible motivator. I think it gives you perspective. You look back at the Earth and you realize, talk about coordination. We can talk about national security, and we do. But twice in history, all the countries used to be right next to each other. Pangaea, the one before it, once again, Proxima Pangaea, we'll all go back again. We can fight over Taiwan, but at some point in the future, it's just going to be connected to all the other land masses. So, I mean, in some ways, in perspective, I think space, is very meaningful back on Earth, both technologically and psychologically.
I just want to say I completely agree with that. Who here watched the Artemis launch? It brought me to tears. It was one of the few things in I don't know how long that everyone I know watched it. Everyone I know had that common feeling of pride and hope and excitement, and ultimately, that common experience is what unites us. It's what allows you to have common bond and disagreement and get to a place where we can iterate together on what a better society looks like. And I think for too long, Americans did not feel a sense of hope and excitement. And it feels like the space race, the ability to go back, to expand into new frontiers, is reigniting that. And I think it's such an important thing. I think what SpaceX has done is unbelievable. The amount of launch they're doing, the cost they've dropped it down to, it has opened up space as a new area of commerce, as a new frontier to explore. And that is something so deeply in the American soul that we want to explore frontiers, that bringing it back is, I think, such a powerful thing for the American psyche as we enter this new era of change and adaptability. So I'm going to steal your word.
No, please. And a lot of their customers are competitors, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's supporting other U.S.-based companies and around the world. But it's a public good, both in the U.S. and further out.
Yeah. Now, before we wrap up and move on to question and answers, I wanted to ask Don if he had any significant exposure to space or investments in space or serious opinions on the matter.
I mean, here I agree that space is super exciting. I mean, I have some investment in SpaceX, and actually was fortunate enough to go and tour the Starbase and see it all. And I mean, it is just amazing what they've been able to accomplish. And of course, now there's this talk of data centers in space, and that is potentially a far more efficient way of scaling out the AI demands for power, and so yeah, I think it's super exciting. I think that it's a far more exciting thing for everybody to gather around and root for than, will the Cubs win the World Series? Although, a lot of people tend to just gravitate towards that.
Yeah.
And then maybe, place some prediction market bets around it.
But, wow, yeah. It is very inspiring how these technologies are shaping our lives today, and I think we are at a cusp of that could go either way, but it's going to be very interesting to see how time plays out. But thank you so much for joining us on this panel. I think we will now move to question and answer, and we'll have two staffers hand out mics. Yeah, that gentleman there. Yep.
Well, thank you all so much for a great panel, a great discussion. I was greatly inspired and informed by what you all said. I want to share a remark that I've heard in the past, which is that wealthy people in the past used to own racehorses, and now they build rocket ships. And so that reflects a worldview that is a bit skeptical of the potential for space exploration in solving what Alec mentioned, the terrestrial problems that we face. So I might ask, to somebody who is more skeptical of the promise of space exploration, what are the solutions that advancing in outer space can provide? What material benefit can be derived from further exploring and perhaps industrializing and developing our presence in outer space?
Maybe I can answer that as the person who's least far along in my career. I've
AKA way younger than me.
I've had the privilege of spending time with some people who are titans of industry in whatever field they're in. This generation of entrepreneur founders, folks like the two gentlemen to my right and left, they were able to do what they did because of courage, because of agency, and a sense that they wanted to go do something hard. And I don't think that stops when you've hit a certain amount of money. And so the drive to go create new rockets, for Eric Schmidt, my old boss, to go run relativity space, or for Jeff Bezos to go create what could be the greatest physical AI startup on the planet with Prometheus. These are people who are drawn to mission and hard problems. And the hardest problems we face right now are ones like, how do you put a base on the moon? Or how do you get rocket launch down to the point where we can now send a colony over to Mars? And I think you do it because you're expanding the realm of human agency and human knowledge. And that is way more exciting than owning a sports team or going and owning some piece of art. And so for those people who've now broken so many barriers to go achieve what they've done, they're looking at the next frontier and saying, I want to go do that too. And I think it's incredibly inspiring. I think the amount of information we get, even when you fail to send something to the moon, is immense, and everybody learns from it. And so I think it's incredibly inspiring that all of these very wealthy folks are doing what they can to push the frontiers of human knowledge. And I would say for you in this room, it's incredibly relevant. I wish I had known when I was 18 that you could just go start a company, and that today there's more capital in the history of the world that's willing to fund you to go do it, so that you can try and experiment and learn and benefit everybody in the process through your experiments. And I hope we continue to see people taking more and more moonshots, literally and figuratively. There's just so much need for it.
I would just add. Oh, sorry. Well,
Yeah, that gentleman in the beautiful green shirt.
Hello, guys. Thank you so much for all of your takes today. They've been really interesting. I was hoping if the panel could give us a few comments about the AI surveillance state.
The surveillance state.
The state of surveillance.
sorry.
When the government,
Don?
Yeah, I mean, these are very powerful tools. And I think we have to assume that governments are going to use them to, to look for bad guys. And sometimes governments will use them to look for or disadvantage their political enemies. And that's super unfortunate. And of course, there are some guardrails in place around that. I mean, back on the crypto side, it's one of the reasons that Congress has decided that there is not going to be a central bank digital currency, because we're super concerned that I think we rightly don't trust our government to not look at how kind of without a court order to look and see how people are spending their money and kind of inappropriately control them. If it's kind of they don't like politically what the person's doing. So it's a powerful technology. It's going to be used for good and bad, and just assume that everything you write on your phone is monitored.
Wow, but sorry to jump in here, but do you think that given this monitoring and given all the good things that can happen, the government should have access to these technologies?
I mean, it's kind of a silly question, right? Okay. I mean, everybody is going to have access to these technologies. The government's going to have access to the best ones, and it just is the way it is.
I would just one retort, just an obvious one, but there was a psychological tool developed about 20 years ago, give or take, social media, and I would guess if I had a series of questions that I could ask about who is using it, who's allowing it to upload videos, photographs, I would imagine that almost everybody in this room is allowing surveillance of incredible depth for the benefit of either social connection or some convenience. I'm not suggesting it's good. I think there's a lot of ways in social media it has been bad. But I would imagine that if people are worried about AI and surveillance, I would say a little metacognition and looking deep inside yourself and saying, how are you using things today? And are you switched off? Are you not involved in any social media? As I think that there's always public good, there's individual good, and there's a price for it. You can make choices to a large extent yourselves. I think that this is back to government plays a role for sure. I agree with Don that a lot of these things are going to wind up being used by a lot of the masses. And so there are negative externalities that have to be thought through. But I would just say I would guess for a lot of people we're already there before AI.
I mean, how many people here use Venmo? And how many of you have turned off your public setting on Venmo? I mean, okay, so half of you are using Venmo, but are broadcasting to the world every time you use Venmo who you're giving money to. I mean, think about that.
Yeah. And one more small point on this. You go back 50, 60 years ago, it took the resources of a nation state to destroy another nation state. Today, an individual has that power. And in that world, the government needs to be able to do what it can to protect the American people. And we want that done through under law. We want it to be done lawfully and with restrictions and checks and balances. But in that world, we want a strong government because a strong government can preserve our freedom. So I don't think those are necessarily in contrast, the need for a government surveillance state and the need for human freedom.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that, I mean, this question of, should we slow down the United States government from having access to AI? I mean, this is a competition, right? China is racing ahead. They are doing everything they can to gain an edge. And I mean, we want the United States to win that competition.
Yeah. We will take one last question from the lady at the back, please.
First, thank you so much for three founders of your useful insights. I really learned a lot. And I just have a general question on AI because currently a lot of investors think compared the current AI boom to the past tech bubbles. I'm wondering, how do you guys see in that view, and how much of the current fundamentals are backing up the valuations of AI in the market?
Yeah, and so I look at price to answer that question. And again, as I was saying before, the price, the hourly price of these GPUs are pretty much at all-time highs. I mean, H100s are more expensive per hour now than when they were first released, and that tells you pretty much everything you need to know. There is so much demand for inference using these tools that, and people are using them because they're useful. And that's being reflected in price. And I think we're just getting started. So there will certainly be plenty of AI companies that will fail, that will get outcompeted by other AI companies. But ultimately, it's very clear this technology is incredibly useful. And investment in the space as a portfolio is going to perform well.
Okay. I think.
Could I ask a follow-up question to both of them, actually? You both have navigated the capital markets probably more effectively than most. I think one of the big changes between today's era and past eras is that private capital markets are doing a fair amount of the investment in this area. The public markets have, they've participated, but so much of it has been done through private capital, which is probably somewhat less susceptible to the wild swings up and down. So I'm curious if you see any impact of sort of the growing vibrancy of the private capital markets and how that can moderate bubbles over time.
I'll take a stab at that. And one last just retort to that question prior, which is a little related. I think technologies have S curves. I don't think this is a technology. I think it's a regime shift. Okay, that changes the equation, right? It's not about adoption of a tool. It's about adapting to what is the TAM of knowledge? It's incredibly big. I mean, the TAM of information and knowledge is, there's 50, and we can go into the math of 50 trillion of knowledge work and what % will it take, but it's a big TAM. There's some interesting, and I'll try to not go too deep because there's a lot to unpack in that. Because I've invested in maybe 15 venture firms. I've done about 100 direct venture investments. I don't hold myself out as a pure venture capitalist, but you yourself are. I would say that the following. I would say that there's a perception both in private equity and venture, more so in private equity, that because things aren't priced that often, that there's less volatility. But it just prices less, right? And there's lots of differences in how people mark things. And there's nuances there that I won't go into, but the latest round in an investment is a pref that's above typically, unless it's pari passu with all the other ones. So are people subtly pricing those different because they have different left tails? No. So things aren't perfectly efficient in the private markets. But I would say a couple of things that do matter. First of all, the scale and size of the capital markets has changed drastically. And this is maybe the most important point I would get across. And that is that the nature of the private companies right now and the nature of this change and the technologies being pursued are so much more capital intensive than we ever saw. We didn't see $122 billion rounds going into companies. I mean, one of the reasons for people like Magnetar to get into venture and with CoreWeave is they needed billions of dollars. And so the rounds are just massive. That does tend toward concentration among some of the venture firms. But it does mean that there's just massive, massive investments. That does tend to crowd out some of the public market, right? I would say that I've been a proponent of easing some of the restrictions, allowing individuals to have access to some of the private companies. I think it's done to protect them, but I do think if they're going to stay private longer, there'd be a benefit to figuring something, adapting, if you will, to that system to allow people to have access to, and maybe with lessons on understanding financial literacy, on understanding illiquidity and otherwise, but I'd be a proponent of that. But I would say that there's a lot of change in the private markets, both the scale by virtue of what is being funded, and you're right to say that these things price every so often. But if there's been if you're talking about a bubble a little bit in the public markets, there's some pretty crazy valuation jumps that occur in the private markets based on sentiment like you would see in the public markets. That's not typical, right? But it's happening more. So I would say some public market feel the scale of what we're seeing, the sentiment, things that we would associate with public markets historically are working their way into the private markets. But
yeah, I think also you're seeing this crazy SPV phenomenon. I have to think there's at least $100 billion of fraudulent SpaceX SPVs floating around that people will, find out at the end of this year that maybe they don't actually own SpaceX shares. But this stuff, some of these SPVs in some of these companies are incredibly volatile, and then there's this complete opacity and like layered SPVs and all sorts of crazy stuff. I don't know.
Could I ask one more question?
Please.
Okay. I'm sorry. This is just such a amazing opportunity. Okay. You've been thinking really hard about adaptability, both on the individual and the institutional level. If we're in a cognitive revolution, do we need to think about how America itself should adapt structures like the Constitution? And if we are to have innovation in the Constitution itself, which, by the way, used to happen all the time with amendments, what are some things that we should be thinking about now to prepare America for this cognitive revolution?
It's such a good question. And I'm going to start at the first rung, which I alluded to it earlier, but I'll just go into a little more depth so that I don't take up even more of people's Friday night. But I would say that and I know I have not read your book, I apologize, but I'm going to go buy it. But I am gathering a little bit, don't judge a book by the cover, but based on the title. I do think that there's a lot to be said for just the conversation getting started. So I think if you take social media and the fracturing, right? Just let's go back for a second. I'm older. If you go back historically, there was a shared narrative. We had a paper, local papers. That's where you got your news. You had radio. You eventually had TV, Walter Cronkite. We all listened to the same story being told. And when social media came along, it fractured the message, right? It created, democratized, if you wanted to speak, it democratized what you could hear, but that fractured the message. Imagine a world where, so now the question is, how do you get coordination, right, as a country in that mode? You were asking me about how do you become adaptive as a country? Well, the first thing is there's got to be a way to communicate across differences, right? So with that fracture, let's pretend that all of a sudden at that exact moment where things are the most uncertain and we have the least amount of coordination among us as a society, that an oracle comes along. We're fractured truth, but something comes along so eloquent, so easy to use, that you could just cede to it answers. That seems really attractive. And what if we allow that to happen? Now you don't have dialogue across differences. The things that actually, I think all of us would say, I know, what did we do at Citadel? What did we do at Magnetar? We created learning organizations. And one of the first things was debate. And the ability, if you see something you think we're doing wrong, raise your hand, like the Toyota Andon Accord, as an example of that, right? You want to say that, you want to sit and be able to talk and go, I think the following is not right, and you're going to revise a hypothesis, test it. All of that needs to happen. But that just think about what I just said. It requires a joint operating system. How you can have a joint operating system unless you have some shared structure of common language? I have a lot of friends personally. They're Democrats. They'll say, I won't even meet with that person. They're Republicans go, I won't meet with that person. We cannot, and the reality is, and we've learned this from data at the Litowitz Center and Northwestern, if you ask a person on this side, what do you think not what do you think of them, what do you think they think of you, and vice versa, they're this far apart. Then you go ask them questions actually about the other. They're this third apart. It's not that they agree. They're just not nearly as far apart, and it's media and they're just not that far apart. If we can get over that hurdle, that is the first step. Get together and realize that as a country, we still have, it's the most amazing country in the world. We still have leftover narrative myths, which Constitution was a myth. It's this thing that is virtual, but it governs how we believe and what values we hold dear. I think going back and creating some version of that, a narration, a story, making people feel comfortable that, what do governments provide? Narrative. They provide skill and agency. They provide truth and trust. We need some of that in the form of a common language. Then we can go on, and there's a lot of hard work to do after that. And of course, my opinion is going to be that we need to have adaptability. But you're not going to get there unless probably you're crossing aisles and you're realizing we cannot be this fragmented. And not if we're going to compete globally or just be successful as a species and get beyond this regime shift. There's tons of possibility on the other side, incredible possibility. But it starts with conversation, in my opinion.
Hard to follow up on that, but no. I mean, listen. I think that's 100% right. If we have this, we're in this environment where, half the country says, well, if Donald Trump says this, then I disagree, just automatically. Yep. Doesn't matter what it is, and that's an incredibly counterproductive place to start from. So hopefully we can move to a more to an environment where people can actually debate ideas in a more constructive way.
Debating ideas in a more constructive way. That is all for today, everyone. Thank you for coming here. And thank you to our panelists for joining us. It was a true privilege to join the three of you